The ranch in Carmel by the sea stretched across 200 acres of California coastline, worth more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. In the fading light of December 2013, Clint Eastwood stood on his back porch, looking out over land he owned but somehow didn't feel connected to anymore. He was 83 years old, wealthier than he'd ever imagined possible, and more alone than he'd been in his entire life. At his feet, a yellow Labrador named Ranger lay with his head on his paws, brown eyes tracking Clint's every movement. The dog was 9 years old, graying around the muzzle, and he'd been Clint's constant companion through years that had brought unprecedented success and devastating isolation in equal measure. "Just you and me tonight, buddy," Clint said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. He'd barely spoken to another human in 3 days. Ranger's tail thumped twice against the wooden deck. Acknowledgement, sympathy, presence. The dog had learned to read Clint's moods better than any person ever had. Knew when the legendary director needed space and when he needed company. When silence was comfort and when it was suffocation. Clint had found Ranger in 2004, the same year he directed $1 Million Baby and won his second Best Director Oscar. He'd been at the peak of his career, still directing powerful films, still respected, still relevant at an age when most directors had long since retired. But his personal life was unraveling in ways that money and acclaim couldn't fix. His marriage to Dina Ruiz was showing cracks that would eventually become chasms. His relationship with his adult children from previous relationships was complicated by years of absence and emotional distance. And Clint himself was grappling with something he'd never expected to feel: profound loneliness in the midst of extraordinary success. He'd gone to look at horses at a ranch outside Monterey when he spotted Ranger, then just called Yellow Dog, by the owner who was looking to rehome him. The lab was about 6 months old, all paws and enthusiasm, bounding across the field toward Clint, with the kind of uncomplicated joy that Clint hadn't felt in years. "This one's got energy," the owner warned. "Needs a lot of attention, a lot of exercise. Not a good fit for someone who travels or works long hours." "I'll take him," Clint said immediately, surprising himself. He named him Ranger after the characters he'd played in westerns: solitary figures who roamed vast landscapes, comfortable with silence and distance. It seemed fitting. If you're enjoying this story about the unlikely bond between a Hollywood legend and his loyal companion, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We share incredible true stories like this every week. Stories about famous figures and the animals who saw them at their most human. Don't miss out. Subscribe now. The early years with Ranger coincided with the most professionally successful period of Clint's life. $1 Million Baby in 2004, Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima in 2006, Gran Torino in 2008, a string of critically acclaimed films that cemented his status as one of the greatest directors of all time. Awards, accolades, financial success beyond measure. But at home, things were falling apart. Dina wanted a life that Clint couldn't or wouldn't provide. More social engagement, more emotional availability, more of everything except what Clint was willing to give. They were fundamentally incompatible, had been from the start. But the facade held together through sheer force of will and mutual denial until, finally, it couldn't anymore. Through this period, Ranger was Clint's anchor. The dog came to set with him, became a familiar presence to cast and crew. He'd lie quietly during takes, wait patiently during long production meetings, then explode with joy during breaks when Clint would throw a tennis ball for him behind the sound stages. "That dog is the only thing that makes the old man smile," a crew member observed during the filming of Gran Torino. It was true. Clint had become more withdrawn, more isolated, maintaining his professional persona while struggling privately with the emptiness of his personal life. But with Ranger, he could be authentic. The dog didn't care about Clint Eastwood, the icon. He just cared about Clint, the guy who fed him and threw his ball and occasionally let him sleep on the bed, even though that wasn't allowed. In 2012, Clint did something that shocked Hollywood and baffled political observers. He gave an impromptu speech at the Republican National Convention that included a now infamous conversation with an empty chair representing President Obama. The media had a field day. Late-night comedians roasted him. Even some of his supporters cringed. Clint returned home from Tampa to find Ranger waiting on the porch, tail wagging, completely unconcerned with political spectacle or public embarrassment. The dog's indifference to Clint's humiliation was oddly comforting. "You don't care that I made a fool of myself, do you?" Clint asked, scratching behind Ranger's ears. "You'd love me if I never made another movie, never won another award, never did anything except throw your ball. That's something." But the empty chair incident, as it became known, was symptomatic of a larger issue. Clint's increasing isolation had left him out of touch, surrounded by yes-men who didn't push back, making decisions without the input that had once kept him grounded. His marriage to Dina finally ended in 2013, their second separation, this time permanent. The divorce was ugly, made worse by Dina's subsequent relationship with a much younger man and the media circus that surrounded the whole thing. At 83, Clint found himself single, living alone in his vast ranch, with most of his children scattered across the country, living their own lives. The loneliness was crushing. Not the peaceful solitude Clint had always valued, but something darker, an awareness that he'd spent so many years building walls, maintaining distance, prioritizing work over relationships, that now when he wanted connection, he didn't know how to find it. Ranger became more than a companion during this period. He became Clint's primary relationship. The dog's needs structured Clint's days: morning walks along the beach, afternoon playtime, evening feeding. Without Ranger, Clint might have gone days without leaving the house, without interacting with anyone, without having a reason to maintain any routine at all. "You're keeping me alive," Clint told the dog one morning as they walked along the deserted beach, Ranger chasing seagulls while Clint moved slowly behind him. "Literally. You're the only reason I get out of bed some days." It was a stark admission from a man who'd built a career on stoic self-reliance, who'd played characters defined by their independence and emotional restraint. But at 83, alone in a house worth millions, Clint was discovering that wealth couldn't buy what he needed most: companionship that didn't want anything from him except his presence. The industry still respected him, still offered him projects, still treated him as a legend. But there was a growing sense that Clint Eastwood had become an anachronism, a relic from a different era of Hollywood. His films were still watched, but they felt increasingly out of step with contemporary sensibilities. He was rich, famous, respected, and utterly disconnected from the changing world around him. Ranger didn't care about any of that. The dog lived entirely in the present. Each walk was the best walk. Each meal was the best meal. Each moment with Clint was enough on its own terms. That presence, that ability to exist without regret for the past or anxiety about the future, was something Clint envied and tried to learn from. In 2014, Clint directed American Sniper, which became his biggest commercial success ever, grossing over $500 million worldwide. He was 84 years old, proving he could still connect with massive audiences, still tell stories that resonated. But he celebrated that success alone, with Ranger in his ranch house. His children sent congratulations via text. Industry friends called with praise. But there was no one to share the moment with in any meaningful way. No partner, no close companion, just the awareness that he'd achieved something remarkable, and somehow it felt hollow. "We did good, didn't we?" Clint said to Ranger that night, the dog's head heavy on his lap, while Clint watched the box office numbers on his laptop. $500 million. That's something. Should feel better than it does. Ranger licked his hand, not an answer, but an acknowledgement. The mid-2010s brought more films: Sully, the 1517 to Paris, and More Time Alone. Clint's children visited occasionally, but they had their own lives, their own families. His friends from earlier decades were dying, off or dealing with their own health issues. The social circle that had once sustained him had shrunk to almost nothing. By 2016, Ranger was 11 years old and showing his age. Hip dysplasia made movement painful. His hearing was going. He slept more and played less. Clint, now 86, was dealing with his own physical decline, slower movement, occasional confusion, the indignities of aging that no amount of wealth could prevent. They were old together, man and dog, both struggling with bodies that no longer obeyed commands, both aware that time was finite and running out. Clint started taking Ranger to a veterinary specialist for the hip issues, sparing no expense on treatments that might give the dog more quality time. Acupuncture, physical therapy, custom orthopedic beds, special supplements, whatever might help. Money's good for something. At least, Clint muttered, writing another check to the animal hospital. Can't buy me another 30 years, but maybe it can buy you a few more. If this story is touching your heart, we'd love to have you as part of our community. Please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this one. We explore the hidden human moments behind famous lives, the struggles, the loneliness, the unexpected sources of comfort and strength. Subscribe now and join us. The specialist suggested swimming therapy for Ranger's hips. So Clint installed a small pool on his property. 3 times a week, he'd help Ranger into the water, supporting the dog's weight while he paddled, the water relieving pressure on those arthritic joints. These pool sessions became a ritual they both looked forward to, quiet time together, working through pain, supporting each other in the most literal sense. Clint found himself talking more during these sessions, opening up to Ranger in ways he'd never opened up to humans. I pushed everyone away, Clint admitted one afternoon, standing waist-deep in the pool while Ranger paddled slowly beside him. Thought I didn't need anyone, thought work was enough. Built this empire, this ranch, this career, this fortune, and what's it worth? Can't even share it with anyone because I never learned how to let people in. Ranger continued his slow paddle, and Clint continued his confession, decades of regret spilling out to an audience of one arthritic Labrador who couldn't judge, couldn't leave, couldn't do anything except listen and be present. In 2017, Clint's loneliness reached a critical point. He'd gone nearly a week without talking to another human being, beyond brief exchanges with housekeeping staff. His children had busy lives. His ex-wives had moved on. His industry colleagues respected him, but from a distance. He'd achieved everything he'd set out to achieve: wealth, fame, critical acclaim, a legacy that would outlive him. And none of it mattered because he had no one to share it with. No one who saw past the legend to the lonely old man underneath. This is what success looks like, Clint said to Ranger one night, standing in his living room surrounded by his Academy Awards and other accolades. Trophies and money and an empty house. Should have spent less time collecting awards and more time collecting relationships. But I didn't, and now it's too late. Ranger, lying on his orthopedic bed nearby, raised his head and whined softly, his way of saying he was there, that Clint wasn't completely alone, that it wasn't entirely too late. That moment became a turning point. Clint realized that Ranger had given him something, precious years of companionship, that asked nothing except care in return, years of unconditional presence during the loneliest period of his life. The dog had been more faithful, more constant, more loving than any human relationship Clint had managed to maintain. And Ranger was dying, slowly, gradually, but inevitably. Clint could see it in how the dog moved, how he tired more easily, how the spark in his eyes was dimming. Maybe another year, maybe 2 if they were lucky, but not much more than that. The prospect of losing Ranger forced Clint to confront something he'd been avoiding. He couldn't keep living like this, isolated, withdrawn, letting his wealth insulate him from connection. Ranger wouldn't be around forever, and when he was gone, Clint would be truly alone unless he made changes. He started reaching out, tentatively, awkwardly, but genuinely. He called his